Gardaí are tonight investigating the theft of a number of oil paintings valued at £600,000 from the home of industrialist Bill Hurst. Amongst the missing canvases is a self-portrait of the Dublin-born artist Graham Knuttel.
The murder of Joey the Brush didn't even make the obituaries. If it was bad news for him, it was worse news for me. I'd lost my prime suspect in the Hearst case. All I had now, apart from a hangover, was a name. Graham Knuttel. I had to find out what he knew before somebody else did. So I made my way to Johnny's Pool Emporium to meet his brother, Peter. I asked him when he first suspected that Graham was a painter.
Well, Graham was 9 years younger than I am, and I don't remember an awful lot about his childhood, but I do remember when I was in the National College of Art, and Graham would have been about 7 or 8 years of age, and he used to watch everything I did, everything, and he'd spent all his time drawing and testing materials out and making marks on anything he could find, and sculpting as well, even at that age. Well, Graham works very directly, and the drawing and everything will be planned out in his mind before he begins. He's always worked that way, and the thing is now that he doesn't like anyone watching him working, and he lives quite a reclusive life. And I can only presume that he still works that way.
Peter gave me some photographs he had of Graham's work. Maybe they had provided a clue to his whereabouts. I hope so. Time is running out.
I often think there's two strands in my work. There's illusion and there's reality. And I think that's true of life, really. The cocktail party is the fantasy in order to present the new account to the client. I often think that painting, for me certainly, is an escape from the reality. I think if I wasn't painting, I'd have been locked up years ago. I spent quite a lot of years sitting in bars in Dublin drinking pints of Guinness, and I paint pictures of pubs, pub interiors, quite a lot. There's something intriguing about bars in the early morning. Early in the morning, the first drink is when the drinker must come to terms with the night before. And if he's a heavy drinker like I was, there's no telling what trouble he got up to. And there's no way of knowing where he'd been without going back to the scene of the crime to find out from his friends, where was I? Or was I in trouble? The drinker who is slightly strapped for cash has an awful fear of the barman. The barman is a great authority figure, and I'm always amazed that when I paint, the customers at the bar. They seem to me like old friends. They seem to me like people I've met before.
It seems Knuttel had spent his student days in a bar beside the Dunleary College of Art. I met its owner, Mike McGowan, to see what he could remember of Graham.
I first met Graham as a student. They had relocated the art school to an old disused bakery across the road. It was the Dunleary College of Art then. And a gang of students came in. I didn't know them as art students at the time, and Graham was one of them. And very early on, it was clear that he was he stood out, one, as a character, and also he would be in the company of the tutors quite a bit, which distinguished him from some of the other students. But he caused as many problems too. As a character, he was getting into all sorts of trouble, and in those days the referees used to be issued with a red and yellow card to warn players, and I had one of these cards, and I on various occasions threatened Graham with a red card that he was going if he kept that up.
I painted this picture in Cadiz, or Cadiz in Spain. This is a selection of the characters I saw around the old port there. I think artists always gravitate towards low life. I don't know why that is. Maybe they feel excluded from society, something like that, perhaps. The gentleman with the flowery shirt in the picture, as you might notice, I've painted the cannabis leaves I painted on his shirt, and I suppose that was a reference to all the shady British expatriates that were hanging around this port, and obviously they were in the drug running business.
Knuttel had a girlfriend called Rachel Strong. I met her to talk about Graham's attitude to colour.
Graham's attitude to colour would be that it's the most important feature of his work. He'd say that over and above the subject matter, that what he concentrates on is the colour, and he uses very shocking, jarring colours, oranges and yellows, colours that clash and really catch your eye. Everything influences Graham. He's influenced by television, advertising, photography. Artists would be Van Gogh, Picasso, David Hockney, European expressionists. He's influenced by everything. He says it's an impossible question to answer, that it's like asking someone what their favourite chocolate is, and it depends on your mood.
Mr. Punch is a theme I go back to regularly. Mr. Punch is my alter ego. He can be cross, or he can be happy, he can be sad, he can be mischievous or aggressive. He is a symbol, and he is a way of testing my emotions for me. I can divine my mood by painting Punch and seeing how he feels on that particular day.
I found out that Knuttel had done 2 portraits of the writer, Michael Hartnett. I met him to find out what they had talked about during the sitting.
Well, the sitting was in my flat, and I found him unusual from the start, because most painters, and I've sat for some portrait painters, when you are sitting or being sketched for the first time, they continue to speak about themselves, if in fact they speak at all. But in Graham's case, I seemed to be doing all the talking, because the questions that were coming from him were all about me. He was probing, and the question mainly dwelt on alcoholism and the fact that I occasionally suffer from such. Initially, I didn't know much about his work. I was introduced to it by my son, who's now 21 and was younger than that, who admired Graham's work very much. But what I like about his work myself, especially in the portraits of people, whether they be real or not imaginary, there's something always almost evil, very sinister about both the men and the women, as if violence at any moment was going to break out. His men, in the main, remind me of George Raft in Profile, in an old black and white movie. And I liked his portraits of me, even though they have that sinister and bitter look about them. But I find now, a couple of years later, that I'm beginning to look like both his portraits of me. It's the opposite of the portrait of Dorian Gray.
When I was painting Michael Hartnett, I did 2 versions of him. The first version, I put him in a bar between 2 men in suits, which you can see on either side. I drew him drinking brandy, which was his favourite drink, he told me, and we were working on the studies for this. And I was inspired by a poem he had written about moving to the city and moving to Ringsend. And in the window of the door you can see the factories of Ringsend, which is an industrial area. I wanted to show the isolation that he was feeling through having had a drink problem and now having to come to terms with living without drink. In the second version, I tried to depict what I think is another predicament of the poet, where he has to perform. I painted him with his back to the audience. I painted the empty glass, and I painted the column which represents his own authority, with his own poems resting on it.
What Hartnett said about the movie struck me. I met the producer, Eoghan Harris, to find out more.
Graham Knuttel, to me, first and foremost, is a great narrative painter. I mean, that's his great relationship with film. My interest is in narrative film. I'm not really interested much in the sort of French cinema, in sort of a formalist kind of mode. I'm interested in Hollywood. I love stories, beginnings, middles, and ends. And in a Graham Knuttel painting, it's you are concerned with the figures before they came into the frame, and they have a history, and they have a future after you've walked away from the painting. You feel their lives go on. This is the world of film noir, B films, particularly the world of the anti-hero. All these men and all these women, they're out of Runyon, Guys and Dolls. They have these block suits. The pinstripe suits are always to see if they're single-breasted, they're a bank manager, and if double-breasted, there's a gangster. So you can pick or choose in a Knuttel painting what it is. It's the world of the Untouchables, of Dick Tracy, of Bogart, the world of the anti-hero in literature of Hemingway, Chandler, and Hammett. And everyone lives their life outdoors. Like, nobody's at home with a wife and a child, like teething or anything like that. Everybody's in a cafe or on the streets. They're going to kill someone, mug someone, meet some guys to talk about some things they're going to do. And whether this is in Dunleary or in Chicago, like downtown Dunleary or downtown Chicago, they're on the pier, they're out. Nobody's at home.
When I lived in London, I had quite a few dubious methods of keeping myself alive. I had a job working for 2 Maltese brothers, sighting slot machines in pubs. I would receive a commission if I could find a home for one of their slot machines. In this picture, I've tried to accentuate the drama that's happening in it with the use of little tricks like leaving the door open. Have they left it open, or is somebody else coming in? I let the figures go off the side of the painting to give a sense of mystery, of something happening in the room that we can't see. They're wearing glasses themselves because they can't see, and they're expecting trouble.
I got a call from this lady, Brighid McLaughlin. She said she had something to say about Knuttel's women, so I spent the morning in a cheap hotel waiting for the bar to open and heard a show.
I was disturbed initially by the kind of disorientated sexual preference in his work. Initially, it was all male-orientated, all military figures, which were very aggressive and were a metaphor for his own subterranean kind of machismo, which isn't obvious on the surface. And the more I analysed the paintings, the more I realised that they were all singular male communities that had no reflection on women. Suddenly women appeared out of the blue, in drag almost, transvestite type of visual characters, which reflected Graham himself.
I spent a couple of years living in London, and being the way I am, I spent quite a bit of time walking around Soho, places like that, in London. I painted the man in the front in a sheepskin coat. I've always associated sheepskin coats with the north of England, and I've always associated places like Soho with provincial people coming to town. I think people who visit cities don't realise that other people live in cities all their lives. I've used the pay booth to make an icon of the woman, because what they're selling is women in these places. I always find those little boxes give it a religious air. If I had my own nightclub, I'd make the little panel in the glass, I'd make it a Gothic shape to make it more ecclesiastical.
At this stage, I needed a drink as much as I needed an answer. So I stopped off at Al's for a single malt. Then I paid a visit to the painter, Gerald Davis.
The thing I like about Graham, from my point of view as a painter, is that he is above all things a worker. He does a lot of work, Graham. I've seen a lot of his work over the years, and I really like it because there's obviously industry there. Now, I always admire industry in a painter above all things, and you'll go along and you'll see a group of his paintings and you think you've seen everything he can do, but then the next time you go, there's a whole lot of different themes that he has. I have a very nice picture that he did of a bird in a cage. Now that wouldn't be typical. You might say there's such a thing as a typical Graham Knuttel, but there isn't. He does all sorts of subjects. He does portraits, he does landscapes, he does pub interiors, He's done some very amusing work based on James Joyce, which I really like a lot because I've done a lot of Joycean work myself, and I know what an important and potent influence Joyce has been on so many painters. And I like the way that Graham Knuttel handles the whole Joycean thing, because there's always if you could paint with a sardonic, dip your brush into sardonic ink or something, that's what you'd be doing, because he has a very funny way of painting. And the other thing that's admirable about him is that he is funny. He's extremely skilled, and to get over the ideas he gets over in paint, you've got to have an intrinsic skill to do that.
This man is in an unfortunate position. Is he going to win the woman? Is he going to win the bottles? Will the other man let him win the woman? Or does he want the bottles? The man with the card is the boss. That there's no doubt. I've often been in this position myself when there's been bottles involved. The Ace of Diamonds is a good card, but there's 3 other cards to make a set.
I found out that Knuttel was shipping his work to Germany. I talked to the art dealer Joseph Bannard to find out more about this Deutschland connection.
Graham Knuttel ist nicht nur einer der interessantesten lebenden jungen Künstler der Gegenwart, denn sein Werk zeigt verschiedene Einflüsse auf. Nicht nur die Pop-Art der 60er, 70er Jahre und Einflüsse aus dem Werk verschiedener anderer amerikanischer Künstler, sondern er hat versucht, zurückzukehren zu den Wurzeln des europäischen Expressionismus wie zu den Werken der Künstler des jungen Blauen Reiters. Graham ist natürlich im Unterschied zu den Landscape Painters des 19. und 20. Jahrhunderts in der Situation, ein Kind unserer Zeit zu sein. Das heißt, er sieht die Stadt als Landschaft, doch diese Stadt ist bedrohlich. Die Natur war schön, Kandinsky und Gabriele Münter konnten herrliche Bilder mit saftigen grünen Wiesen malen. Knuttel steht das nicht mehr zur Verfügung. Ihn interessieren Telegrafenmasten, all das, was der Mensch in die Landschaft gesetzt hat. Doch diese Landschaft ist inzwischen bedrohlich geworden. Es ist eine Landschaft, die den Menschen eigentlich nicht mehr benötigt. Der Mensch ist durch seine eigenen Erfindungen überholt. Und in dem Hintergrund lauert stets das Böse. Wenn wir zum Beispiel seine Werke anschauen, Bilder wie Paradise Lost, dann sehen wir, dass der Künstler uns hier eine Natur vorstellt, unabhängig von den ursprünglichen Farben, denn der Mensch hat in diese Natur eingegriffen. Es gibt keine grünen Blätter mehr. Die Bäume tragen Blätter und Zweige in allen Regenbogenfarben, wie Kaugummipackungen. Der Mensch hat sogar die Berge verändert. Er hat Pyramiden anstelle der Berge gesetzt. Doch diese Pyramiden brennen. Sie verschmutzen die Umwelt. Das Gefieder der Vögel ist nicht mehr weiß. sondern schmutzig, gelb, grau. Und der Paradiesvogel selbst noch in seinen leuchtenden Farben, groß, mit der Königskrone. Er weiß noch nicht, ist er noch König, ist er noch Beherrscher dieses Paradieses? Was passiert im nächsten Augenblick? Denn schon lauern zwei Katzen. Wer sind sie? Wollen sie mit ihm spielen, mit dem großen Vogel spielen oder wollen sie ihn angreifen? Der Künstler gibt uns darauf momentan keine Antwort.
This painting, in a way, is a send-up of the pictures you see in big country houses. It's a send-up of the stiff upper lip. It's a portrait of a formal marriage. Everything's in place. Everything's correct. The husband gives the wife flowers.
Banner told me that Knuttel had done a portrait of a convicted psychopath. I needed professional help. So I sent what I had to the psychologist, Professor John McKenna. A few days later, he rang asking me to meet him in the prison where he was a consultant. As I walked through the lifer's wing to his office, I wondered what lay in store for me.
If we take a look first at his family, we find out that his grandfather, his paternal grandfather, was born in Dresden and lived in Dresden. And his father then left Germany and came to England and, of all things, joined the RAF. And we all know the opinion of Dresden inhabitants on the RAF at present. And then the father, after living in England, came to Ireland, and Graham was born in Ireland. So from that, we may conclude that he has a rather confused, if contradictory, national identification. We can see that even in his childhood days, his conflicts were being walked through in the way that many children walk them through. He said his early artistic endeavours consisted of drawing soldiers marching and bombs falling and explosions in red ink. And the Freudians would say he was sublimating his anxieties through his early attempts at art. And then he himself states in his autobiographical notes, just here, he said, "My own doubts and fears and hopes are expressed in the faces that appear in the bars. And I try to use colour and form to express the emotions of my figures." And really, when you look at his figures, you can see that both the men and the women are often very aggressive. And he is probably getting rid of his aggression. It's not that he likes aggression, he may be afraid of aggression, his own aggression. He's getting rid of it. And in his art, his fantasy life is overcoming many of his emotional attitudes to the world.
This is a painting of a psychopath. I use a device of the mirror so that it could be the killer himself becoming the viewer. He's a serial killer that's just committed a murder, and anything I've read about serial killers, it always interests me that their killing appears to be for them some sort of performance, and the washing seems to be a very important part of the ritual when it's over. And I find it very strange that somebody who can kill somebody else, can then confront themselves in a mirror. The hammer he's left there, and perhaps he's going to use that again. The blood and the rest of it goes down the sink, but the hammer will stay there to be used again.
The trail was cold. Then I got a call telling me where I could find the guy who ordered the hit and Joey the brush. The case was closed. Even so, as I walked back to Al's for last orders, I regretted not getting to the bottom of Graham Knuttel. He remained a mystery to the end.